Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. As you can see, we are powering higher in this bull market, moving towards my short-term target of 40 based on the swing rule. Drawn a couple of lines here. One is the relatively short-term trend line going back to March 22nd. We've got roughly 1, 2, 3 confirmations. We're now moving into a sharper line and possibly even sharper than that. So pretty normal to see a rounding up move when you're in the bull market, especially when you're rocketing higher towards old highs. Remember, we do have a high of $50, but it's not on this chart, so it's way up here. We're still just approaching it, just the old nominal high. So a lot of the shorts, a lot of the shills have been saying it's overbought, it's way too high. If you remember some of the videos I've done, Jesse Livermore said a market is never too high to buy and it's never too low to sell. So I'm going to have to do a video on Robert Prechter. Apparently I read recently that Prechter had shorted silver at, I think it was 37, 36, set a stop at 38.50, so I suppose Mr. Prechter was stopped out here. I think the common saying is that a stopped clock is right twice a day. I guess the way I describe it is, I think Mr. Prechter is a clock running backwards, so he's just wrong all the time. As far as I know, the guy's never been right about anything. Not to say that's not a knock against Elliott wave analysis. I don't put a lot of stock in it, but I think Mr. Elliott discovered something, that markets tend to move in five. They move in 5 movements on the upside and 3 movements on the downside. I don't know how that caused Mr. Elliott to predict, or I'm sorry, Mr. Prechter to predict various tops in silver, but as you can see, we're not anywhere near a top here. So it's a bull market, just need to keep buying. For those of you who aren't on board yet, if you're dollar cost averaging, buy when you can. If you're waiting for a pullback, well, just wait for a pullback. They're not hard to spot. They're very violent. My last pullback that I purchased at was at 25. It was right here. A lot of people got in at 26 or so at this pullback. And quite a few people got in here. This is a very good pullback right here. So if you look at it, you've got some good buying opportunities, but as we go parabolic, they'll become shorter and shorter. Here's another one, a little tiny one right there. Shorter and shorter, quicker and quicker. You have to be a lot more nimble because we're going much, 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 much higher from here. Because just based on fundamentals, $39 is still as cheap as dirt. And I'm going to show you the reason why. Let's take a look at guns versus butter. Now, most of you are fairly familiar, at least with the terms guns or butter. Basic idea is you can either afford to buy guns, or you can afford to buy butter, or you can buy some guns and some butter, but you can't buy a whole bunch of guns and a whole bunch of butter. As far as guns, I think we have 160 bases around the world. That's a lot of guns. Butter. We have a ridiculously overpriced educational system that produces horrific results. We have food stamps, welfare, Social Security, Medicare going through the roof. Again, Republicans and Democrats, you have to remember, under Bush was the largest Medicare increase in the history of the country, a bankrupting move. Under Bush, we had the financial bailout. Remember that? There's going to be rioting in the streets if we let these big crooked banks go under. There's going to be martial law. That was under Bush. Now, under Obama, and let me pull up a chart here. Here's a pretty simple chart, not hard to understand. There's a lot of charts out there, and with Paul Ryan coming out with his latest thing, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Actually, let me talk about it right now. We can go to Zero Hedge, and they've got an article now about, it's pretty interesting that Tyler Durden posted an article by Nomi Prinz about Paul Ryan. Now, Paul Ryan's the new conservative star. He's the latest Newt Gingrich, which means he's the latest wolf in the hen house. He's the latest phony conservative who wants a whole lot of guns, not so much butter. And then we've got Nomi Prinz, who, if we look at her, she's against Wall Street, but take a look at her biography, we find that before becoming a journalist, Nomi worked on Wall Street as managing director at Goldman Sachs and ran the international analytics group at Bear Stearns. So Nomi was involved in a company that was shorting silver and ran itself into bankruptcy. Lovely. So I'm sure we're going to want to trust this pair of snakes. Paul Ryan, good cop. Nomi Prinz, bad cop. Or Nomi Prinz, bad cop, and Paul Ryan, good cop. Take your pick, either way. A whole bunch of liars, a whole bunch of crooks. Just a big charade. Now let's look at the facts here. Federal spending. A lot of things jump out of this here. First of all, if you remember, right about here, 2008, we had our bailout, right? Remember, we had, you better give the banks a whole bunch of money or you're going to have martial law. Okay, so that was right about there. Oh, look, spending's gone up. So how's that? How could spending still be right? Shouldn't we go after that? Shouldn't we go back to here? We bailed out Wall Street. Shouldn't the spending be back down to where it was before we did that? Nope. No, still going up. Now let's look at revenues. $2.15 trillion. Didn't Obama tell us that right in here, roughly 2009 or so, didn't the recession end? So why are revenues lower than they were in 2000? And lower than they were in 2006. So here's your $1.54 trillion deficit. So, oh, and one other thing to point out here. Remember the pundits are, they love to talk about Bill Clinton's and, of course, the new governor of Ohio, how they work together, the Democrats and the Republicans, to give us a plan to balance the budget and all that stuff. Well, here's the Clinton administration, starting in 92, ending in 2000. Here's his 8 years. Looks like a slow, steady rise in spending to me. Do you see any place where this line goes down? I think we had a big spike in 85. It looks like we actually have a decline in the line there. Maybe one there, just a little bit, or flattening. And then up, 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 and away. So It doesn't really matter who's in office. Bush bailed out Wall Street. Obama did more. Both have ran giant wars. Obama's invading Libya. Bush invaded Iraq. Do you see now that we're talking good cop, bad cop? We're talking guns and butter for both parties. And we're talking both parties agree on one thing. We're going to bankrupt the country. So it's not surprising that when we look at the silver chart, we can see that the US dollar is going to zero. That's what this chart tells you. That's what the politicians are doing. And if any of your assets are in paper, I don't care if it's paper stocks or paper bonds or paper money market funds or any kind of paper, if that piece of paper says so-and-so owes you this much money, it's going to zero. You're going to lose everything. This is the only thing that has any value. Physical silver in your hand and physical gold in your hand. New highs today in gold. That's what it means. It's not rocket science. This is the coming default and collapse of the US government. You're seeing it in the metals. And that's what's going to happen. There's no way of avoiding it. The politicians are just playing games, good cop versus bad cop, and the market knows it. So we're going to move through 40 to 50. I expect a bounce at 50, back down. Don't know how far. I think the Fibonacci people probably could predict that better than me, but we'll hit 50 and we'll take a big drop. That's when you want to buy more before we head up to triple digits. Talk to you next time.